in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents. A kind reminder to all those in person and online that for the safety of interpreters, that is very important that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you all for your cooperation.
That all comments should be addressed to the chair.
Pursuant to 1083, SO 1083, the committee is resuming its consideration of Report 6 of the Sustainable Development Technologies Canada.
Our witness, but I received a notice last week that there was a conflict. I endeavored to find out what the conflict was. If it was medical in nature. It was not. I instructed the witness to be here since the witness had confirmed she would be here at 11 o'clock. And I am expecting her perhaps by noon, at which point we will take things up again. Until then, this meeting is suspended. solicited table? I'm seeing yes. So if you'd like to take a seat, sir, Mr. Grosjean. Thank you. Alors, Madame Méthode, you.
Ms. Mito?
Remarks. The floor is yours. I do understand. I'll mention this now. You sent in some documents. You might reference those to members. Those will be sent around, I hope, later today, as they are just being, in one case, being translated and the translation is being verified. So these documents will be sent to you, I hope, by the end of the day. You have the floor, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and dear members of the committee. As you may know, I appeared before the Industry Committee under oath for 1 hour on November 28, 2023, and at the time I answered all questions related to the period during which I was a board member of SDTC. I'd like to remind you that I was appointed by the Foundation's members under the chairmanship of Jim Balzilli. I was also interviewed by the Auditor General of Canada, who, after conducting a thorough investigation on the same matters, did not issue any criticism against me. However, I understand that some members of this committee still have questions related to that period, and their interest mainly concerns two things. First, the Canada Infrastructure Bank. It has been suggested that I used my position as a board member to favor a project in which Ms. Annette Verschuren was involved, the Oneida project. This is false. I provided you with a memo prepared by the General Counsel, and that is contained in the documents you will be receiving. This memo demonstrates that I complied with all applicable conflict of interest rules during my tenure as a board member of the CIB. And it also highlights on page 3 that I was absent, I repeat, during the board meeting where the Oneida project was discussed. Mr. Chair, I therefore find it very difficult to understand the allegations against me on this matter. Second, SDTC regarding the COVID relief measures. Some members have claimed that I voted in favor of relief measures benefiting 23 companies linked to 36 potential conflict situations where Cycle Capital might have had interests. It is very easy to prove this is false, but it seems like no one has bothered to verify this. I am therefore taking this opportunity to set the record straight. Cycle Capital has never invested a penny in the 21 of the 23 companies that were mentioned. I declared a potential conflict of interest regarding these 21 companies when Cycle Capital was considering the possibility of investing in them. However, for these 21 companies, Cycle Capital decided not to invest. Not a dollar was invested in those companies, and this decision was made well before the vote on the COVID relief measures, several years before. So you'll understand that when there is no investment, there is no conflict of interest. I'm providing you with a table outlining the chronological sequence for each of these companies. So this leaves two companies, Green Mantra and MindSense. I followed the rules. I submitted a conflict of interest declaration for these companies in which Cycle Capital indeed had interest. So why did I not recuse myself during the vote on the COVID relief measures? For two reasons. First, because I was unaware that these companies would benefit from those measures. We were then at the start of the COVID pandemic, and as this was an omnibus measure for qualifying companies, no list of potential beneficiaries had been provided to us. SDTC's legal counsel, a well-known senior partner from a major law firm, Mr. Ed Vandenberg, informed us that we could not be in a conflict of interest. I'm an engineer. I'm not a lawyer. I relied on Mr. Vandenberg's professional judgment, as did all the other members of the board for that matter. Mr. Chair, these are the easily verifiable facts on which some committee members are questioning my integrity and tarnishing my reputation. All that while carefully remaining under the protection of parliamentary privilege, but their words have consequences, and I've received intimidating and threatening messages. This brings me to one final point, Mr. Chair. A member of this committee stated here barely over 2 weeks ago, and I quote, "Many board members had a conflict of interest. One of those with by far the most conflicts was André-Lise Méthode. Her company, which she founded, Cycle Capital, made significant investments. $250 million from the Green Fund was injected into organizations in which Cycle Capital had invested. I've heard other figures over the past few months that I voted to allocate $42 million, $140 million, $200 million, and now even $250 million to companies in Cycle Capital's portfolio, which represents an inflation of nearly 500% in just a few months. I wonder where all these figures come from because they do not hold up. What I can say, however, is that the only vote I may have cast unknowingly in favor of companies in which Cycle Capital had interests was the COVID relief measures. My stake in Green Mantra and MindSense at that time was 0.04%. and 0.3% respectively. The maximum gain from these measures was therefore $154.73 for Green Mantra and $90.63 for MindSense. Mr. Chair, there is a big difference between $250 and $250 million, a gap that's almost as wide as the moral and reputational damage caused by these unverified allegations. I am now available to answer your questions.
Et on vous remercie.
Thank you.
First round, which is 4 members with 6 minutes each. Mr. Perkins, you're leading us off. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madame Matot, is how the correct pronunciation. Is that true? Hello. I'm just asking you the correct pronunciation. It's Matot?
Méthode, oui, c'est ça, Monsieur Perkins.
Ça va, Monsieur Perkins.
Merci.
That's fine, Mr. Perkins.
The Cycle Capital owns shares in Ecairn, Alberta Biofuels.
Pouvez-vous reprendre?
Could you please repeat the question? I didn't understand.
I'm going to go through a list of companies. I'd like you to confirm whether or not Cycle Capital, any of your funds, has made investments in them. Ecairn, Alberta Biofuels, ENEKREM. Do you have an investment in that? Yes or no?
Enerkem,
Encare Alberta Biofuels is a company. We are
la réponse est non directe.
Well, the answer is no, not directly. We do not invest directly in them.
They're listed on your website, $12 million. MindSense Technologies, you've admitted here, you had investments in, correct?
Nous détenons moins de 10%.
We have less than 10% interest in MindSense.
Slush fund. How about Spark Microsystems?
Dans le cas de Spark,
In the case of Spark Microsystems, I was not on, or when I was a member of the board, we weren't an investor. We only became an investor years later.
vous êtes un investisseur. On va répondre.
Sorry, I will give you a clear answer. Our investment began after I was a board member.
Concentric Agriculture, Inc.
Oui, nous sommes investisseurs.
Yes, we are an investor in Concentric.
$2.6 million they got from the slush fund. Polystevert.
J'aimerais clarifier une chose.
I'd just like to clarify something, if that's possible. Mr. Chair, is that possible? Well, it's Mr. Perkins' time, so if he allows you to respond, yes. Mr. Perkins, do you let me? Go ahead.
We're looking for yes or no. Does Cycle Capital own any ownership of Polystevert, Inc.?
Oui, nous sommes.
Yes, we are investors.
$1 million from the slush fund. ViewReal.
Nous n'étions pas investisseurs.
We were not investors when I was on the board.
Are you an investor now?
Oui, l'investissement s'est fait en 2.
Yes, in 2022, we invested, and then I had not been on the board for at least a year.
Cellufuel?
Non.
No.
Chrysalis Labs?
Non.
Borealis Wind?
Non.
These are the ones I think that were listed by the Auditor General you referenced earlier.
Non. En fait, dans le tableau que j'ai remis que vous n'avez pas reçu, monsieur.
In the table I gave you that you didn't receive?
Est-ce que je peux
I'm just double checking the General's list.
Alors, c'est Mr. Perkins qui a la...
It's Mr. Perkins who has the floor currently. He will be asking you questions. Now, what often happens is that if you want to say something, it's quite likely that another member here may ask you questions that you will be able to include your answer in, but that's how it works. However, Mr. Perkins is the one who has the floor right now.
I'll ask again. Chryssal Labs.
No.
Chryssal Labs. No. Borealis Wind. No.
Non.
Equisphere.
Non.
Global Spatial Technology.
Non.
Fractal Systems.
Non.
GHGSat.
Non.
Green Mantra.
Oui.
Yes.
Helen Inc.
Non.
Hortu.
Non.
Metamaterials.
Non.
You're not an investor in metamaterials.
Non.
Never have been.
Never happened.
Peak Power.
Non.
So why are all these listed as conflicts of interest by the Auditor General?
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Well, thank you for the question. Here is how I proceeded during those years. I declared potential conflicts and real conflicts. So anytime there was a meeting of the board, we would be given a list. If we were analyzing a file, I would declare potential interests of conflict. But usually an analysis takes about 8 up to 15 weeks, depending on the cases at hand. But during these COVID relief measures, we decided that we wouldn't invest in these committees. And at times for years, so we weren't investing in those companies. And in fact, the Auditor General was very clear at the time in her report. And I'll try to quote her here. She said, during those 2 votes, in 63 cases, the members of the board had voted, even though they might have declared a potential conflict of interest. But in 2/3 of the cases, there were not conflicts of interest. And that was my case. So out of the 23 companies...
Nous ne
Thank
sommes
you.
pas
Are you an
investisseurs.
investor in Terramera?
Non.
Advanced Intelligence Systems?
Non.
Seminos?
Non.
Pyrowave?
Non.
Okay. So you do have a number here where you received, and the companies you invested in received at least $10 to $20 million of green slush fund money while you were on the board.
Je m'excuse, j'ai mal.
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand what you were saying. Can you repeat?
Perkins, encore une fois.
So between the yeses and nos, there were a number of yeses here, and of those yeses, it adds up to about $20 million, I believe, of SDTC money that went to those companies while you were on the board. Is that correct?
Pendant mon mandat,
During my term, my tenure, we looked at about 250 files over the 5 years I was there, 4 businesses through programs during which I declared my interests or investments, and I recused myself. So there was $10.4 million, and we were...
Based on what the confirmation you had earlier. I'm not asking for a
Avec les nuances
conflict
que
of
je-
interest explanation of how the board operated. I'm asking for, based on your yes or no's, you have about $20 million here of companies that you had investments in
votre
while you
chiffre
were
de
on the
20
board.
millions est faux, Monsieur Perkins. Votre chiffre de 20 millions est faux. Je vous demanderai d'écouter ma réponse.
is incorrect. The number is incorrect.
To you, I'm sure, Mr. Perkins. Next, we have Ms. Yip. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming today again and for providing documents ahead of time. That's much appreciated. Is there any testimony or clarification from the previous questions that you would like to add or clarify?
Oui, j'aimerais dire
Yes. I'd like to say that some members of this committee have made allegations that are false and that are verifiable. For example, it was said that I had funded Ms. Verschuren's projects. I wasn't even involved in any of those projects. And as a matter of fact, I sent a memo that showed that I was absent that day. So that's one example of something that is false. It was also said that Stephen Guilbeault was a major shareholder when he had no shares in Cycle Capital. So, in fact, there's an attempt to throw all these sums together that were numbers that were correct over the years, but the numbers that have been added up are false. I have always recused myself. I was always declared my interests. And as Mr. Perkins has showed, there were potential conflicts of interest, but there weren't actually conflicts of interest. And despite that, I always was absolutely honest and absolutely clear in terms of my interests. So that is what I want to add.
Well, thank you. We had heard from PCO appointments last week who confirmed that you were, in fact, not a GIC appointee, but appointed by the STDC Foundation. Can you confirm this?
Oui, je vous confirme qu'en
Yes, I will confirm that. That is the ecosystem. The members of the foundation are representatives of the ecosystem. And they made the recommendation that I sit on the board, and it is Jim Balzilli, based on the recommendation, who appointed me in 2016.
Thank you. Have you donated to any federal political party in the last 25 years?
25 dernières années,
25 past years, well, that goes quite a ways back. At a federal level, I do not believe so. The only public connection I may have had would have been that I worked in the cabinet of Lucien Bouchard. That was a Péquiste, actually, government.
You have stated in front of Indu Committee that you declared all conflicts of interest, whether real, apparent, or potential, and that you chose to recuse yourself from every decision. Can you confirm that with us today?
je vous confirme cela.
I am confirming that. There's only the COVID-19 case because there had been a recommendation from Ed Vandenberg from the Osler firm that we could remain because there was this omnibus measure, but there was no actual names involved.
Setting aside the COVID funding, how many times would you say you had to recuse yourself for real, apparent, and potential conflicts? And I'd like specific numbers, please.
OK. Laissez-moi juste.
Just allow me a minute. Oh, in terms of real conflict of interest, 4. As a whole, based on my numbers, 32 times, and that is not including COVID. And 4 of those times were real conflicts of interest because we were investors. And as I said earlier on, some were under consideration. There are about 1,200 files that come before us. I don't necessarily do the preliminary studies, but we do have a mechanism in place. And every time when I asked for the files, I recused myself from them. And there are also exceptional measures. For example, GHGSAT, my niece works for GHGSAT, and I recused myself in that case as well.
So 32, that's quite a number, and that includes apparent and potential?
Oui. Et potentiel.
Yes, and potential. Why do we do it like this? Is because it's very important in our area that when there's a file under consideration, there is potential influence. And so that's why, even if some of those may have received no funding whatsoever, I've always recused myself. I've always wanted to do that because we want it to be absolutely clear. This is federal monies, taxpayer money, and we want to be as honest as possible. And that is why I recused myself each and every time. And that list was drawn up by experts based on a database called Salesforce, which is very sophisticated. We know exactly when every file is open and when it's closed. It's all been documented over several years.
Who, in your opening statement, you mentioned someone was intimidating and leaving threatening messages. Who and what is that all about?
Excusez-moi, je vais être un peu émotive.
I'm sorry, I might become somewhat emotional now because, you know, it's very, very difficult when you listen to false statements, for instance, in the social media, and to see how people are reacting to you. And when you see members of your family and friends, you know, I have needed a lot of support, and that's partly why Mr. Grelot is here with me today. I have dedicated my life to fight against climate change. I'm an engineer. I studied in atmospheric studies. I did my master's on the very first terrestrial ecosystems. I am a convinced and a dedicated ecologist, and that's why I know Stephen Guilbeault, not because he's a minister. He's an advocate. I'm an advocate. So I found it very, very hard to see my reputation and my career tarnished, where I gave of myself. I involved my family, my friends. I build one of the biggest risk capital companies. We are known globally. We have attracted billions of dollars of investment to Canada because we are credible, we are professional. And so I found it very hard to see this. And I was afraid, actually. I was so afraid, actually, that I went through procedures to hire security for my home.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés. Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Mito. You were a board member, and I think you're the longest sitting board member. Is that true? I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I don't know. Well, I'm telling you, you are. And if I'm not mistaken, you were also on the committee looking at projects. Yes, the PRC. This is the committee that reviews in detail projects, and then there's a final approval by the board. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Now, in your role within this committee, did you look at all the details of the hundreds of pages of each project? Well, I've sat on many boards in my life and many committees of this kind. It was a very difficult task. The work is very detailed. The processes are very detailed. And sometimes I was spending 40 to 50 hours, actually, on considering these projects. And I did provide my opinion on these projects. But what I want to say is this. The work was very specific. The people preparing the files were very specific, very detailed. And there were teams involved. There were assessment teams. And in the PRC, we would often ask for extra work because we weren't satisfied with what we were seeing. So we would do that kind of work within the PRC. Now, I was a member of the PRC, but I was not the chair. I was just a member. How many members were there? Well, that I don't remember. I'm sorry. Were you 3, 4, 10, 8? We were a small number. We were sort of a subgroup. Now, you mentioned that external opinions are very important. So there were technical opinions, there were scientific opinions, and there were also financial opinions. Am I correct? Well, there's several aspects to it. There was intellectual property. Yes, but there were two, only two were there. Sometimes there were 3. You also said that these opinions were very important because it was very important this take place before your review. Well, expert opinions are very important, and team opinions are very important, as well as one's own opinion. You may have an expert telling you that everything's a good idea, but you may decide it's a bad idea. Let's take SPAR Macrosystems. Now, you were no longer on the board when these amounts in question were allocated. However, that company had not actually been the subject of an expert opinion. As a matter of fact, experts had recommended not to invest. Now, when they applied, or when they started these procedures, you were already sitting on the board, weren't you? Just allow me to clarify. Sparks Macrosystem received can you give me the date, actually, for this? Well, there was 2021, and then there was another amount when you left. All right. So in 2021, money was allocated. They received money. So they received money when I was no longer a board member, right? That's correct. But they had started these applications when you were a board. Well, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you about the beginnings of procedures because we only see the end result of an analysis. Well, you'll probably understand where I'm going with this. External opinions do not necessarily recommend or not that they receive funding. I'm going to give you another example. New Protein International. This is a company that had good reviews, whether it was financial or technical. The external opinions were in favor. However, they did not receive funding. So that leads me to believe that funding can sometimes be arbitrary. Well, would you just allow me to answer that very quickly because I have limited time? Listen, when you decide to provide money, the decision is made based on several factors. So when the SDTC is involved, sometimes we may ask that there be an increase, say, in the technical aspect or the technical opinion, or we may require further technical information. Well, in the case of New Protein International, there was technical approval, financial approval. All the experts agreed, and yet they received nothing. Well, I don't remember that case exactly. Well, let's talk about sustainable development and the purpose of SDTC. They fulfilled the criteria. Now, Sparks Macrosystem did not fulfill the criteria. So for someone on the outside, like myself or members of this committee, it's very hard then to understand. You have these two comparable projects in many ways. One receives funding and the other doesn't receive any. And that's what my question is. How did this review committee weigh these factors in favor or not of a project? I understand that you have expertise, but there were people who were being paid by SDTC to provide these objective opinions. So what happened? Well, the committee would discuss the issues involved. I mean, the committee is there for that. We look at all the issues involved. So it's very difficult to compare these files. You know, there were 250 under consideration. However, we did have very in-depth discussions. So you may have an academic, for example, who says, this is the best. But you may have another person sitting on the board, for example, who may be familiar with other aspects within that sector. So it's a whole series of factors that lead to us supporting or not a project. Now, the expertise around the table involved engineers, accountants, lawyers, business people. So there were many people who brought these various perspectives, and we would have these kinds of discussions. So I can't speak directly to the projects you're raising, but what I am going to say is that the process was transparent. There were debates. It was honest debate. And also the SDT staff had their word to say as well. We would listen to them because we were presented these files, very detailed files, actually.
Mr. Cannings, you have minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Merci, Madame Méteau.
Thank you, Ms. Méteau.
I'm new on this committee, so and there might be some people at home watching this that are as confused as I am about some of the allegations, some of your explanations, some of the questions through the Auditor General's report, etc. So I'm trying to sort this out. It seems to be a lot of potential versus actual conflict of interest. There's the timing of your investments, the timing of decisions. I think I'll just start with one of the things that keeps coming up is this omnibus motion. Could you just maybe take some time to describe what's in that? And it sounds like there is no... just help me understand what's in that motion, what you see as a board member, and what you approve or not, versus any potential or actual conflict of interest.
Merci beaucoup pour votre question.
Well, thank you very much for the question, Mr. Canning. So COVID was happening at the time. There were no vaccines. There were several federal and provincial organizations and organizations throughout the world who were trying to help companies and business entrepreneurs get through this period of time. For example, there was a business in our portfolio that went down to zero in terms of its revenue within COVID very quickly. So there were conversations going on around the world on how we could support these businesses. SDTC was no different from any other organization around the world that were concerned. about these companies. So we had a discussion within the board. We wanted a sort of an omnibus measure or a bill, an omnibus resolution. And what was it? Well, the purpose was to look at all these files. All those people receiving monies would have 10 to 15%, for example, of extra supplementary money to get through this difficult time. So this was seen as a measure to support these businesses and entrepreneurs who were at greater risk, given that supply chains were falling apart. So this was an opportunity to save these businesses. So this was an omnibus resolution. And why was it an omnibus? Because we didn't actually have a specific list. I couldn't see a list. There was a debate within the board as to whether or not we should do this. And I want to point out that there was the CEO, there was the president, there was the board president, there was the governance members. I was just a member. But Ed Vanderbilt, at the time, who was counsel, who was a senior counselor, and Osler actually is a huge firm. It's one of the biggest firms in Canada. Was there, and we asked if we should do this, and we asked if we should be declaring interest. Well, he said, because you don't have the list, you don't need to. Now, when you sit on a board and you ask for a legal opinion, usually you abide by that legal opinion, and that is what I did. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Mr. Canning.
No, that was fine. I just want to turn now, again, we hear conflicts of data, conflicts of, amounts of money. Mr. Perkins had a list of companies that apparently came from the Auditor General that you had conflicts of interest. And again, I'm still unclear as to where the disconnect is between that list and what you were saying. And I would just
Alors, vous allez recevoir aujourd'hui, quand la traduction...
Today, when it has been translated, you will be receiving this. And this is the list, the Auditor General's list, along with our comments. So you'll see the date when we received the project to consider within Cycle Capital, not SDTC. You'll also see the date on which I would have declared a conflict of interest, because we registered that for every single file. You'll also see the date when we turned down or refused the project. So I'm being completely transparent here. You'll see when the projects began consideration, when we turned down the project, what Cycle Capital's interest was, and when Ms. Metteau, for example, interests, or what they were. For example, I had one, I was a co-investor, and it was 0.03%. You also have the date of the board's involvement, and you can also see the relative percentage of my own investment. So as I said in my statements, in the case of MindSense, my interest was 0.03%. There were 21 of the 23 companies that involved no conflict of interest, but that previously could have been considered as a potential conflict of interest. So those 21 out of 23 committees had no holdings whatsoever with Cycle Capital or myself. But I can understand why the list might have led to some confusion, and that's why I'm providing you with this very detailed table. And usually, I'll tell you, we don't necessarily provide that kind of information to people, but I want it to be absolutely clear.
All right, thank you, Mr. Canning. Beginning our second round, times will vary. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Metteau, you served on the board of SDTC from 2016 to 2021, correct?
21 juin 2016 au 14...
21st of June 2016 to the 14th of September 2021.
Released a report that covered much of the time that you sat on the board. You said that there was nothing contained in the Auditor General's report that implicated you in any way. But you have to know, as a member of the board, that that isn't true. The report of the Auditor General was a damning indictment of conflict, corruption, and mismanagement of SDTC while you sat on the board. Isn't that the case?
Il n'y a aucun blâme.
Well, there was no blame laid.
It's a damning, damning indictment, including $59 million of taxpayer money that improperly went out the door, putting aside issues of conflicts of interest. Gross mismanagement while you sat on the board. Do you take responsibility for that?
Je n'ai pas à prendre toute la...
No, I'm not going to take all responsibility for that.
For the fact that you sat on the board as $59 million taxpayer dollars improperly went out the door in non-compliance with the very agreement SDTC had with Industry Canada. You take no responsibility. Is that what you're saying?
Juste avec la liste sur le COVID,
Well, just on this list, this COVID list, and the 21 companies that were listed, I think that
With greatest respect, I'm not talking about the COVID relief payments only. I'm talking about $59 million. That's beyond just the COVID payments, tens of millions more that improperly went out the door. And I'm just asking you, do you take responsibility for that as a member of the board?
j'ai contribué au meilleur de...
I contributed to the best of my abilities as a member of the board, as all members of the board did.
Take no responsibility for the mismanagement. It's telling. What interest, if anything, do you or Cycle Capital have with MindSen Biochemistry?
Au moment du vote, c'est...
At the time of the vote, is that what you're asking? Well, our stake in MindSense, if I look at it, my personal stake is 0.03%. And we are an investor at 8.7% in MindSense. Did I answer you?
Biochemistry.
MindSense Technology.
No, MindSense Technology.
Hence, biochemistry, what interest do you or Cycle Capital have in that entity?
Je ne connais pas MindSense Bio.
Well, I'm not familiar with MindSense Biochimie. I only know MindSense Technologies.
Provide some context, because the Auditor General identified the COVID payments that you had monies were funneled into certain companies, but you had an interest in, and you've clarified which of those companies you or Cycle Capital had a specific interest in at the time. But there's another item, number 18 on the list, that was provided by the Auditor General, in which she lists you as having some sort of conflict with respect to MindSense Biochemistry, in which MindSense Biochemistry received $2 million from SDTC.
OK. Monsieur Cooper, on va régler quelque chose.
Mr. Cooper, allow me please to clarify something. I want to make sure we're talking about the same company. MindSense Technology is not the same as MindSense Biochimie. So MindSense is a data company involved in mine waste. So I'm going to answer you anyway, but I'll speak to MindSense. We're not talking about the same company, though.
Time is very limited, and I just want clarity as to whether you had an interest, or Cycle Capital had an interest in MindSense Biochemistry at the time that
J'ai
it
aucun
received
intérêt dans MindSense
$2 million.
Biochemistry.
I have no stake or interest in BioSense chemistry.
No.
Technology.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Time is up.
Thank you very much, Ms. Methot, for being with us today. just before I start my questions, is there anything from that previous round there that you want to clarify or expand on? Any of your answers that you maybe didn't have a chance to answer fully?
Oui, j'aimerais.
Yes. I'd just like to help Mr. Cooper out. Perhaps it was miscommunicated or miswritten. So I personally have a stake of 0.03% in MindSense. And we have 50 investors throughout America, Canada, the United States. There are private investors, there are institutional investors. We've gone through various processes to get these funds. Sometimes there have even been competitions. And collectively, these investors hold, in MindSense Technology, a stake of 8.7%, and my own stake is 0.03%. So I want that to be absolutely clear. So yes, there is an interest, because when you have 8.7 of a business, you have to declare a conflict of interest. You recuse yourself, and that's what I've always done. So, Mr. Cooper, I'm telling you this, MindSense Technology has extraordinary technology. It's changing the face of mining. It'll be providing so many changes, favorable changes within CO2 emissions, etc. And I'm hoping they'll be on all the global markets, and I hope that will help position Canada when it comes to mining and ecological mining.
To confirm something else, in case anyone missed it the first time you mentioned it, when my neighbor here asked you the first time, could you just confirm that Mr. Guilbeault has no stock or stake in the company Cycle Capital?
Oui. Alors,
yes, I am confirming that Stephen Guilbeault has no shares. What he does have, and perhaps that's what Mr. Perkins was referring to when he put it on X or Twitter, I'm not sure. He has a passive, I would call a passive interest. It's like an amount that is paid out when there's a very high performance. But to date, Mr. Guilbeault has received nothing, $0 from this passive interest. He is not an investor. Mr. Guilbeault is not an investor. He has no shares, nothing.
For that, now you are a bit of an expert on the clean tech sector. So would it be correct to say that compared to other small and medium-sized businesses, the clean tech sector and smaller innovators rely more heavily on public sector funding to help de-risk investments?
écoutez, on a fait une étude en 2016.
I traveled throughout Canada. I went to see everyone in the provinces, in the private sector, in around 2016, and there was this study that showed that Canadian businesses were receiving half as much as American companies. Climate tech became a very important player, and that's why Bill Gates actually started investing in these climate companies. So what I'm concerned about is this, is that there is less funding here. We also looked at intellectual property. There are countries like China who have something like 90% of the intellectual property in some sectors. That worries me. It worries me that we're not active in this area. And I'm talking about, and I'm inviting the public sector and the private sector to continue its commitment to this sector. It's all very well to make statements to slow down climate change. But what we have to do is invest in Canadian businesses. We have to be an international player. And right now we are not. Our businesses are funded by the public sector and by the private sector, but not enough. Now, I'm dedicated to this. I have been for over 35 years. I think that we can be very good at technology, very good at business, and I think we can build good businesses, good large businesses for Canada and have a global role to play. But that's not what we're doing right now.
So you've stated that you think we're underinvesting in this sector compared to other countries. However, it is a highly competitive and high-performing sector in Canada. A few years ago, the industry accounted between 2.9 to 3.3% of Canada's GDP. Would you have any idea what it represents today as a percentage of GDP?
Je suis désolée, je connais pas.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. I'm not an economist. I'm sorry, I can't answer. Thank you very much. Ms. Sinclair Degagné. When you responded to my questions, my previous questions, and I used the word arbitrary to draw a distinction between projects receiving funding and those not receiving funding, you told me that you felt that was not the case. You didn't agree. But I can give you several examples of projects that receive funding even though there were negative opinions about them. And in all these cases, there was a connection between SDTC and we were never an investor. No, I realize that you weren't an investor, but I'm giving you an example of a project where the outside reviewer or the expert gave a negative opinion. He was asked to reword his opinion. And I realize you weren't an investor. I'm not talking about conflict of interest here. We're talking about criteria, eligibility criteria. Let's take Farmer's Edge. You were there. The outside revisors or experts were asked to review their recommendation or revise their recommendation. Now, you said earlier on that you try and strike a balance between the expert opinion and your own opinions within the board. So perhaps that looks like you're trying to strike a balance, but then why would you ask an outside expert to modify or revise their recommendation in the cases of projects where there's a connection? Well, I think there's something else that I need to clarify, Ms. Sinclair Degagné. There are no cases of projects that were brought before this review committee that hadn't been supported by the SDTC team. So, yes, but if the outside reviewer, no, just listen to me for a moment. I'm sorry, it's my time, but okay. We did not consider files that hadn't been recommended. I realize that, and that's what I'm trying to say. That's a problem because it's a bit of a problem when outside experts have a negative opinion, but the CEO is asking them to change their opinion. So there's a problem then. Now, you're going to say that yes, it was supported by SDTC, but what I'm saying is that there was always a connection, and they were funded despite the negative opinion of outside experts. Please allow me an opportunity to answer you, because it can be a bit complex at times. There were no files that were brought before the committee that did not meet the criteria. So you can meet the criteria. Sometimes you may meet 75%, or perhaps you might get 75% approval and you didn't meet all the criteria. Fine. But there were times when the outside expert was being asked to change their opinion so that that business would receive funding. Well, I never saw that myself. You never saw that? Well, I wasn't involved in that level of operations. What I did see was that within the board meeting, a weakness could be identified. And if they wanted to be eligible, then they had to improve some aspect of it. They were asked to improve the quality of their, for example, their submission. So nothing was rubber stamped. We had people who would give this serious consideration. We would identify weaknesses. Let's take intellectual property. They might say, you know, there aren't enough safeguards for the intellectual property. Go back and do your homework. And I saw this from time to time. People were asked to go back and do their homework.
The floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Just to follow along with that kind of line of questioning, you know, I'm new to this, and so I have glanced through the Auditor General's report, and the Auditor General reports, you know, the one I'm looking at, where they examined 58 projects, and of those 58, they found that 10 were ineligible, and they estimated that 10% of the rest of the projects that I guess they didn't analyze carefully were also ineligible. So how was this during your, first of all, was this during your tenure on the board? And second of all,
J'ai été 5 ans au conseil.
I was on the board for 5 years.
yes, I know, but I'm not sure when these
Okay.
were happening. I'm just wondering, you know, Ms. Sinclair de Gagne is talking about projects that didn't seem to meet criteria that were approved, as the Auditor General found, and I'm just wondering how that can happen, whether you were on the board or not, but so
Okay.
maybe answer that question first.
Alors, je pense qu'il y a un élément qui
I think there's one point that's important to understand, and this point has been raised in other meetings. I did have an opportunity to listen to some of the testimony. The board would propose a business plan to the government. At the time, situations would change, organizations would change. So that business plan would be put to the government. And oftentimes, the board requested an update because things might have changed. And from what I understand, these updates or changes were not made in a timely fashion, according to the Auditor General. But when things evolve, you need for there to be updates. Let's take clean technology. 20 years ago and 10 years ago were very different. 5 years ago, it was very different. When I began in this area, there weren't even 200 businesses in North America involved in clean technology, and now there are thousands. So there have been changes that have been proposed to the minister, for example, and these changes have been approved. But from what I understand, not all those changes were made say, perfectly or in a perfect amount of time. And I think that's what the Auditor General is trying to.
Quick question. Thank you very much. Suivant up next, Mr. Perkins again for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So based on your testimony here today, you have companies that Cycle Capital invested in, which you're partial, if not full owner of Cycle Capital, have received over $30 million of investments from SDTC while you were on the board. You are the biggest single beneficiary of the SDTC money while sitting on the board. Now, you're aware that the SDTC Act, which applied to you, says that board members cannot themselves benefit, nor can their family members benefit. So your companies received more than $30 million while you were on the board. Isn't that a benefit contrary to the SDTC Act?
Ce que vous dites est faux.
Well, what you're saying is false. Out of 250 files that were analyzed when I was a member of the board over those 5 years, 4 companies from Cycle Capital received $10.4 million. 4 companies for which I declared my stake. I followed this governance protocol. I recused myself from the discussions, and I had
received $10 million alone from SDTC while you were on the board. $10 million just in one company. Now, I will ask again. No, you don't get to interrupt me. Sorry, you don't get to interrupt me.
Order. We really cannot have people speaking over.
You don't get to interrupt.
Order. Mr. Perkins, Madame Méthode, s'il vous plaît. Vous aurez l'opportunité de répondre.
You will have an opportunity to answer once he has asked his question, and I am certain that if you don't get an opportunity, another member will allow you to respond. I'm sorry, but that's how things work here. It's Mr. Perkins' time, and he's the one who will ask his questions. So you are here to respond to the questions that are put from the members. And to date, things have been going well. There have been a couple of times when you were not able to respond, and another member provided you with that time to respond. So I'm sure that will happen again. Mr. Perkins? May I ask a question? To me, you may. Chair, when there are statements that are incorrect, that are false, that are part of the question, well, you will have an opportunity to respond. I'm trying to do my best. So, Mr. Drouin, go ahead. I have the utmost respect for my colleagues and for the chair, but you, as the chair, need to make sure that there is a good flow of back and forth. But if there are statements that are false, then the witness has to be allowed an opportunity to respond to that. Well, as I stated, this is Mr. Perkins' time. There's a conversation happening. It is going well. At times, people are cut off, yes. But you will have an opportunity to respond.
Whether it's 10 million or whether it's 30 million or whether it's 50 million, it's contrary to the Act. You broke the Act that you served on. The SDTC Act says you cannot personally benefit. When SDTC made investments in your companies, while you were on the board, you broke the Act. Did you not? It doesn't say in the Act recuse.
No, but the principles of governance and ethics that we are taught when we sit on the board is to declare our stakes, our interests, and to recuse ourselves. And it's the same in all those other companies that have connections with the Canadian government or any other government in Canada. That is the practice.
Public board and spending taxpayer money is to not vote and have a board you're sitting on give money to companies that you own interests in. Now, I will ask you again, when you joined the board in 2016, the value of Cycle Capital in its assets under management was a little over 140 million, and when you left, it was 600 million. Seems like it was pretty good business for Cycle Capital to get money from SDTC where you're on the board, and that you also utilized it to screen companies.
C'est quoi, premièrement, l'affirmation?
First, your statement is confusing. Asset under management. Are you talking about asset under management? Yes, in 5 years, there was probably very good performance. However, we are a private fund, not a public fund, and you are confusing two different things, and I'm very surprised, Mr. Perkins. You know, these are the kinds of things that you should understand.
So when the culture of corruption on the board by Annette Fasharian came on and changed, there were 9 directors, including your colleague Guy Ouimet, who voted for money for himself. You had money given to your companies. Stephen Kokuchar had money given to his companies. There is a culture of corruption that you were participating in approving not only your money, but the money to other board members. Isn't that correct?
C'est complètement faux.
That is absolutely false. And when Jim Balzilli...
You didn't vote for Mr. Ouimet's companies. You didn't vote for your own because you left the room.
Le lien que vous faites avec la corruption.
The connection you are making with corruption is absolutely unacceptable, Mr. Perkins. It's false.
Members that were appointed, whether they were liberals or separatists, were using this fund in a little cozy group to support each other's companies. That's exactly what happened. That's what the Auditor General found. If you had been a governor and council appointment, do you believe the ethics commissioner would have found you not guilty?
No, I don't think so, no.
Not guilty or guilty of breaking the ethics laws of Canada?
Je crois que...
I believe that the ethics commissioner can reach the conclusions they want to reach. I'm not the commissioner. All I can say is that when I arrived at the board, I was told what was expected of me, how to comport myself. I have always followed those recommendations, and I went even further because I was declaring even potential conflicts, not actual conflicts. Out of 32 times, 28 were a potential. They weren't real conflicts of interest.
Minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I want to start, I suppose, with, my NDP colleague, Mr. Cannings, has said he's new and trying to get to the bottom of things. the Auditor General report lays out mismanagement of conflicts and record keeping. And here we have a very good example of just that, where you are articulating that you declared potential conflicts that obviously was not adequately captured in the processes, such that here you have Conservatives screaming about actual conflicts, and you went list by, name of company by name of company by name of company, and you're answering no to the vast majority of them. Was there ever an instance, apart from the COVID approval, was there ever an instance where you approved funds for a company that you had a stake in as a board member, where you didn't recuse yourself?
OK. La seule situation.
The only situation would be the one that I covered in my opening statement, and this had to do with the COVID relief measures, because this was an omnibus.
Right, and just so I'm crystal clear, the Ethics Commissioner has found in relation to Ms. Verschuren that did amount to a violation of the law, but as the Commissioner found, it was premised on incorrect legal advice. And so to the extent that there was any inadvertence here, it's with respect to the COVID approval, and it's based on advice that you received from corporate counsel. Is that correct?
Oui, c'est le Conseil judiciaire.
Yes. Legal counsel gave us that advice. All board members discussed this. There was the governance committee, the CEO, the president. So this was the subject of a debate, and we followed that opinion, that recommendation. I can't say anything more than that. We followed that in good faith. And I'll just recall that, and the outcome, the only personal impact would have been $250.
That you have been subject to the character assassination that you have been subjected to. You're a serious person in business. You have devoted yourself, as you say, to addressing climate change through, when you were starting out, it was a very small sector in this country, and it has rightfully grown. Why, if we have a future Conservative government that is going to govern by the, if you listen to the opposition today, and they're going to govern with character assassination and crayons, and why would any serious person involve themselves in the day-to-day of that government in supporting the work on a board like you served in, if they are going after serious people without evidence, as they've clearly done today and over the last number of weeks?
Je le sais pas.
Well, I don't know. That's what I don't understand. Why are Canadians being attacked? Canadians who have tried to build a sector that once upon a time did not exist. I mean, I even co-presided a United Nations group involved in this. I've been invited all over the world to speak to this. And I guess it just hasn't convinced all the members of this committee. But I'm open to dialogue. I mean, that's the culture. I come from a culture of dialogue. It would give me great pleasure to sit down with Mr. Perkins and talk to him about his riding, his beautiful riding around Halifax, where so many good things are happening. There are so many businesses that need to be supported. And it makes me so sad. It makes my family so sad, my staff sad. And the businesses in our portfolio are so saddened. There are even people who've retired from the public service who said, well, good luck today. Everyone is so sad to see a woman like myself, a feminist, an environmentalist, a person who has dedicated their lives to make positive change in climate change, and who is attacked like this with no justification and in a way that is so un-Canadian. That's not what Canada is. Canada is dialogue. And all I have been the subject of is attacks. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman. I don't know if...
I do want to get to the question of a response here, because you talk about a culture of dialogue, and you've got Mr. Perkins talking about a culture of corruption and accusing you of corrupt conduct just mere seconds ago. Now, he's protected. He's weaponizing his parliamentary privilege and defaming you behind the cover of that parliamentary privilege. So my challenge today, Mr. Perkins, step outside of that parliamentary privilege and say the exact same thing, and see how she responds. Because if I were her, I would sue you for everything you are worth.
Thank you very much. That is the time. Beginning our third round, Mr. McCauley, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, thanks for being with us today. Just some quick questions. You mentioned when you first joined the board, you were told how to comport yourself and what was expected of you. By who, please?
Oui, alors il était...
Who?
Oui, il était recommandé qu'à chaque fois qu'on avait un intérêt réel et perçu,
I'm not getting
de
translation.
déclarer et de...
When even we were told that we should,
Start the translation.
Okay,
of the
très
word.
bien. Allez-y, s'il vous plaît.
Pas de problème.
go ahead. From the beginning. So when you were part of the board, once you arrived at the board, there would be someone who would meet us and who would explain those expectations and the
Ah, je me souviens pas, ça fait plus de 10 ans. Mais
I'm sorry, I don't remember. That's more than 10 years ago. But at the time, it was done.
Any ethics
je me souviens
agreement?
pas.
I don't remember. But what I can say is that had there been a document to sign, I would have signed it absolutely, because I always sign what I'm supposed to sign. I don't have a problem signing a document.
The COVID emergency, it seems to be an excuse thrown out there for poor governance. Well, it was COVID, we were trying to prop up companies. Did you not sense a need to still follow the old governance rules, the old conflict rules, even though there was the COVID issue going on? And the reason I ask, I'm like Mr. Canning's relatively new to this study, and it just seems person after person is basically saying, well, it's okay, we wasted taxpayers' money, perhaps money was taken by companies that shouldn't have been. Yeah, there was a lot of conflict, but it was COVID. We suspended our oversight rules. Why, if you're on the board, you're very experienced, why would you agree to basically throwing out governance rules to push through this omnibus spending, as you described it?
Administration, les membres du conseil.
The board members, including myself, asked questions about this. And it's not that we forgot anything. It's that we had a conversation.
You asked, okay, you said you had a conversation, asked questions, but you were hired on the board, probably compensated, I assume, to provide oversight and governance. And yet, you had a conversation in you and the others just threw the oversight and governance and the rules out the door. I'm trying to grasp why.
Alors, je m'excuse, je vois pas.
I'm sorry, I can't see your name, but what I would say is no, that's not what happened. We didn't just set these rules aside. So the Council, Vanderbeck, and the members of the Governance Committee and the board members had a broad conversation. There were indications that we could do what we were going to decide to do, and that it was compliant with the rules, because this was an omnibus resolution that wasn't penalizing anyone. And you can laugh, but that's the kind of conversation that we had.
Amusing that a group of board members, many conflicted, decide among themselves, because it's an omnibus, we're going to agree together to change the rules.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm looking at it. There were rules before, and then an omnibus rules for the COVID spending. Am I wrong there?
Non, je pense que vous avez tort.
I think you are wrong, because there were about 250 companies that were reviewed over the 5 years I sat on the board. 4 of those companies were Cycle Capital companies, and 2 did receive money under the COVID relief measures, and that represented about $250 worth of interest. Now, I'm an engineer, not a lawyer. And can I just finish?
Le Président, est-ce que je
Let
peux
me interrupt
terminer?
you there.
No.
You keep,
Mr. Chair, can I finish?
like, at what level is it okay then to say, wait, I have ethics here, I cannot be involved in this?
était sur la liste, je
whether
l'ai
it's $1
découvert
or
après.
$1 million, it's
Je l'ai-
still
je-
incorrect.
I didn't even know I was on the list. I discovered this afterwards. Years later, I discovered this. That list wasn't, we didn't see that list when that discussion took place because it was an omnibus measure.
S'il vous plaît. 20 seconds, please be quick.
Canadian, we just heard there's over 2 million Canadians a month now accessing food banks. Any of them are watching will see connected insiders accessing taxpayers' money without any oversight. You mentioned about Canadians are being attacked. Do you not sense that perhaps Canadians sitting at home are going to be enraged over this issue? $400 million taxpayers' money while they're at food banks going to connected insiders?
Je voudrais surtout pas enlever quoi que ce soit.
Well, of course, I don't want to take anything away from food banks. Listen, what you're saying is false. It's just simply false. This was an established program with criteria, and we complied with those criteria. We received advice. I wasn't appointed for governance. I was appointed to use my abilities as an engineer to review some of these files. And I sat there as an honest board member. That's all I can say. I can say that out of 23 companies on that AG's list, well, there were 21 that did not receive money. And yes, 2 did. That's all I can say. That's all I can only tell you the truth. Mr. Drouin, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to thank Ms. Méthode for being with us today. I'm sure that you have other issues to deal with besides the ones being brought forward at this committee today. But I've said this before. I think we're spinning in circles, and once again, you're seeing this. I don't understand this tactic on the other side of seeking people out, but I think it displays a lack of knowledge. Now, you've spoke about your experience. You received the Order of Quebec in 2018. You got an Excellence Award by the Order of Engineers. You've been recognized in the area of clean technology. So in terms of les méthodes in Canada and Quebec, there aren't 100,000 people like you. I think they're rare. Inaudible for the interpreter.
J'étais seule. Il y avait personne.
There weren't many at the time, but I would say that today there are many people like myself. There is an entire ecosystem out there. There are business people. There are people in finance. There are many people now who believe that they can develop a profitable technological sector. So André Lee's méthode is no more exceptional than anyone else. There are many people out there, and we want there to be many people like that out there. So you were responding earlier to some of these accusations. Could you speak to us a little bit about the assets versus the interest on assets? Well, Mr. Perkinson's earlier on was referring to something that's on our site, our website. So the assets under management, basically. Now, when we started, there was about $100 million, and now, yes, we're well known. And the number was $600 million. Someone said that, but soon, Mr. Perkins, it'll be $700 million, because now there are many foreign players, and there are many people who want to co-invest in businesses, including Canadian businesses and including climate tech. Now, he was confusing 2 things. There are assets under management, and then there is performance. Now, even though he confused those things, I respect him. All right, so you referred to growth and the growth of assets in your portfolio. And the difference between, let's say, clean technology sector and others. It's growing. However, there's a lack of capital in Canada, as there is in other sectors as well in the country. But could you perhaps speak to the development of this sector in general? Well, this sector has evolved in a truly incredible way because there are so many opportunities. We look at about 1,000 files a year. Now, today, a third of these projects actually come from Canada, and they are much better quality than they were 10 years ago. So there has been significant improvement in Canada, but not only in Canada. I would say that overall, the planet has improved these kinds of projects. So my concern, though, is that Canadian entrepreneurs and Canadian companies perform just as well as our European counterparts and our counterparts to the south. And now I'd like to come back to these relief measures. There are many agencies that were told to do the same, get the money out fast. They weren't all businesses that already had a relationship with the government. They didn't always have a contribution agreement. Whether it was in SDTC or whether it was in other regional development agencies, the same word was put out to make sure that these groups or clients could be supported. And we didn't always know who it was going to be. There wasn't this specific list. No, there wasn't a specific list. It was the entire portfolio. These were people who had already qualified, who already met the criteria. No new businesses were added. And what I would add to that is this. During COVID, especially that first year, it was particularly difficult for businesses. We were getting in touch with them on a regular basis to see how they were doing. And there was an extraordinary effort deployed by our staff, deployed on the part of the federal government, in the United States as well. We were able to have meetings with entrepreneurs. We were able to explain to them how they could access various loans and grants, because we didn't want them to go bankrupt. Do you know, when a business goes bankrupt, sometimes it can take up to 10 years to get them back up to speed or get another company going. So there was this extraordinary effort that was made on the part of the public service, on the part of banks, on the part of risk capital investors. There were hours and hours and hours that were spent in Zoom meetings, team meetings, with so many people, with the sole purpose of supporting these businesses. And I want to thank the work of the public servants, of government employees who were there to do this work. It was true teamwork at the time. Thank you. Once again, Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, you have 3 minutes. Ms. Méthode, let's speak between women and between environmentalists. I hear what you're saying. And in fact, there may have been comments that have been made on social media that were not in the interests of businesses in Quebec, whether or here or elsewhere. And I think the purpose of this committee is not to undermine any work or challenge any work that you've done over the course of your career. However, what I am seeing, what I observe as a committee member and as vice chair of the Public Accounts Committee is that there was a first report that came out of the statement of a whistleblower. Raymond Chabot drafted this preliminary report, and it was quite a devastating report, actually. It showed serious mismanagement within SDTC. And then the Auditor General herself needed to review this. And in 2023, when she began her consideration of this issue, the board members stepped aside while she did this. The board members all resigned, actually. Meanwhile, funding was stopped by Minister Champagne. when the OAG, or rather the AG, announced that a report would come out of this. It turned out that it came out that an initial noble purpose to this organization ended up crumbling over several years. So my question is this. As a board member, do you not think that you should have or could have pointed out some of these issues earlier and not just resigned as soon as it turned out that the AG was going to draft a report so that businesses could continue receiving their funding? Those companies that were eligible and that met the criteria, so that 90-odd% of businesses could continue to be supported and would not be cut off because of the behavior of some of these board members. Well, I left SDTC before there was any report that came out. And as I pointed out in my opening statement, I wanted to leave early on. Actually, I wanted to leave after 4 years because it was a considerable amount of work looking at all these files. And I was asked to stay for 1 more year. Now, there was COVID, etc., so I decided to extend my tenure. But I did not want to be given a second mandate. I had wanted to leave for a while. Now, yes, there were allegations in terms of human resources, perhaps, but I was not aware of this. It happened after I left. I wasn't aware of them, no. These allegations took place in 2023. Well, I just want to excuse me. I'm sorry. We will get back to the questions, but...
Please, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madame Matot, you tabled...
Pardon, je m'excuse. It's Ms. Blaney. Pardon me. I'm getting ahead of myself. So you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please. Pardon me, Ms. Blaney. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chair. I thought maybe there was a different cycle here. I'll give you the space to answer the question you were asked just at the end from my bloc colleague.
Merci, Madame Blaney.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Madame Sinclair de Gagny, I left the board in 2020 because I was asked to extend for a year, but my intention was not to stay. I did not resign. In the thrust of all these revelations and accusations. I'd already gone.
So I guess as a person new to this committee, we've seen in the report from the Auditor General that there are some very significant concerns about what happened. And I'm just wondering if you could talk me through what your experience was and how you feel and what your response is to those accusations.
My first response to those accusations is the table that you will receive that will explain and shed light on the disputes. The auditor looked at the past but did not examine the time of the vote. So my first goal is to shed light on that. The second responsibility I have is just what I saw on the board was that it was a board that was relatively disciplined. It was not perfect, like most boards, but there's also a team at SDTC that worked very hard in preparing for files. There was a great deal of professionalism. Now, where there is disappointment is because the board tried to bring about change, supported by the CEO, revised business plans that were sent to the minister. And I think there was a lack of balance between because things were not brought up to date. So there was a poor alignment, and I think that is what you can see in the report. Personally, I find it very sad. As to the rest of the allegations, I was not there, so I cannot say anything about whistleblowers or the different human resources because I was no longer at the board. And I don't know if I've correctly answered your question, Ms. Blaney.
That was And I appreciate it. And I agree, this is very concerning. I guess my last question would just be, you talked a little bit in your response to me about some of the things that were happening sort of during that period of your transition. Was there any warning signs for you as you were leaving that there might be concerns coming out in the future? Nothing.
Non, quand j'ai quitté, non.
Not when I left, no.
Thank you. Now, again, I apologize for missing you inadvertently and briefly. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Matteau, you have tabled with this committee a number of documents that we haven't had the opportunity to review that appear to contradict aspects of the findings of the Auditor General's report. Will you agree to, in addition to tabling those documents with this committee, to also turn those documents over to the RCMP?
Mr.
Chair, point of order.
I have nothing to hide, but I don't know.
Councillor, j'ai un point d'ordre. Oui, Monsieur Durin.
Again, two powers that are very well known in the Constitution. We're mixing judicial. If the RCMP wants documents from André-Lise Méthode, I know they can just get a search warrant very quickly if they feel to do so. But this tactic, c'est du salissage. Encore une fois, c'est du salissage.
It's just, dirty politics.
Back to you, got 4.5 minutes. The documents will be publicly available. So whether the witness wants to turn them over or not, the RCMP is going to be able to review them through our committee. They are being tabled. That we distributed to you all. They're publicly available, I hope, this afternoon. You have the floor, Mr. Cooper, 4.5 minutes.
Well, I'd invite the witness to answer my question.
Moi, je pense que...
I think I have put everything on the table here. I have nothing to do with this. I do not understand your question.
I said, would you managed to table a bunch of documents with this committee? Will you also just hand them over to the RCMP? Yes or no?
Moi, s'ils ont des questions, ça va me faire plaisir.
If there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. I have nothing to hide. Neither from you.
Oui ou non? S'ils ont des questions, ça va me faire...
If they have questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
So I take it the answer is no.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Well, I asked if Weber...
Point of order,
Ms.
Mr.
Chair.
J'ai encore une point d'ordre. Yes.
Point of order. Go ahead, please.
I have sat here and I have watched the Conservatives go after our very esteemed witness here.
Mr. Cooper, I'm going to hear Ms. Khalid's point of order.
And
yes, Ms. Khalid.
further to my colleague, Mr. Durin's point, it is very unfortunate that we're trying to interfere in the RCMP's investigation. If there is one, if the RCMP wants documents, I'm sure that they have many ways to reach out to the witness directly to get those documents. I would really appreciate if Mr. Cooper can stick to what is the mandate of our committee and not be irrelevant and not be irrelevant.
Ladies,
please do not talk over me, Mr. Cooper.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ms.
Yes,
Khalid,
you have
okay,
done it quite deliberately, Mr.
Ms.
Cooper.
Khalid, I'm going to turn things back over to Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper, why don't you move on to your question? You have just over 3 minutes left.
Question. I didn't hear a yes from Ms. Matteau. So moving on, is it correct that your Cycle Capital companies, 4 of them, received $10.4 million from SDTC? Did I understand your testimony correctly?
I told you that I recused myself. 4 companies I was the one to say.
Questions, you do your best to provide an answer, and I'm simply seeking clarification that there were 4 Cycle Capital companies that received
Mr. Cooper, hold on a second. I'll give you the floor. No. As counsel, you're here to work. Est-ce que ça marche, oui? Oh, no, okay, yes, you're here to, that's fine, okay, as long as, pardon me? No, I know she wasn't speaking, no, I agree, and you're, whoa. Whoa, okay, everyone calm down. Everyone calm down. Everyone calm down. You're
if you
here.
Leave,
okay,
Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Drouin
Say it
as
outside.
well.
Say it
You'll
outside.
face the
because
full
I would say it
consequence of the
outside.
law.
I would say it outside
Say
because I
outside.
simply.
Say it. Go,
I'm going to
go
suspend this meeting for 4 minutes. I'm going to slowly bring us back into order as, oh, I think I'm going to just keep suspending for another few minutes. To Mr. Cooper for his remaining 3 minutes. I'm just going to update everyone because I know there's some questions about timing with the question period coming up in about 40 minutes. It is my intention to have us done by 2 o'clock. We're going to finish this round, which includes Mr. Cooper's remaining time, Ms. Yip. Then we'll do the fourth and final round, which takes about 25 minutes, at which point we'll end the meeting. So, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor again. And just, colleagues, let me just say as well before I begin, when we interrupt one another, not only does it make it hard on the interpreters, it is distracting to the witnesses as well, and I think to our audience. We do rotate here. The witness, I think, has been, been asked some tough questions, but also been given additional time to speak in subsequent rounds. I think that has worked well. And I'd ask that we all respect one another. Mr. Cooper, back to you for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the time that we've had, I have confirmed that you did testify that $10.7 million, not $10.4 million, went to 4 cycle capital companies while you served on the board. I would draw your attention to Section 12 of the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act that states that no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities. Isn't that precisely what happened when your cycle capital companies received $10.4 million from SDTC?
Écoutez,
Listen, I recused myself from those conversations. It's not 10.7, it's 10.4 million from 4 companies over 5 years. And I recused myself from those conversations to not be in the room.
With the greatest of respect, I didn't accuse you of not recusing yourself. I simply cited a section of the SDTC Act that is very clear but no director shall profit or gain any income or acquire any property from the foundation or its activities, and yet 4 cycle capital companies received $10.4 million. I would submit that that is in violation of the Act. And don't take my word for it. I would cite paragraph 6.47 of the Auditor General's report that states, for the duration of a director's term, a director buying or selling securities of an ultimate recipient or being compensated by or holding an investment in an ultimate recipient receiving funding risks not following Section 12.2 of the Act. Those are the findings of the Auditor General. So are you disputing the findings of the Auditor General?
En fait, moi, j'ai
I followed the rules that I was given as a board member. I followed the rules to the letter. I'm an engineer, not a lawyer, and I did what I was told to do. If I was not appointed to the board, Jim Buzzley would have had to refuse the appointment.
Todd, did you read the Act in the 6 years that you sat on the board? Did you bother to read the Act?
j'ai été 5 ans.
I was 5 years and a quarter on the board, and when I began, I read all the documentation, and the way things were managed is I was asked to declare any conflict and recuse myself, just like any company with ties to the government, and I followed the rules.
Ms. Chip, you have the floor for 5 minutes as well.
I am disappointed and disgusted by the Conservatives' behavior and would ask that Mr. Cooper apologize. As such, I'd like to move the following motion, that the committee call for the member for St. Albert Edmonton to apologize personally for his blatant defamatory accusation against Ms. Meadow.
Have you sent that to the clerk?
Yes.
What's your reasoning for paying?
Let me ask the member to apologize. So I'm going to have a quick ruling on this, which can be accepted or challenged. Ms. Shipp, I'm going to move and hear my reasoning before the challenge. I'm going to move this out of order. You're welcome to bring it up at a later time. The reason is, if we go down this path, I'm probably going to excuse Madame Méthode, and we will bring her back at another time. So I'm hoping we can deal with this. That's okay, Mr. Durant. I'll hear your reasoning. I view it as something that is tangential and not a matter at hand. But Mr. Durant, go ahead. You have the floor.
Monsieur le Président, vous allez savoir.
Mr. Chair, there are many precedents, and I'll ask you to examine those at the Official Languages Committee in recent months, but there are many precedents. Now, your party even presented a very similar motion regarding a witness. So you has said that, but there's inconsistency, and the clerk gave the opinion to the chair that the motion was in order, and there was almost a 2-month debate. Now we're being told that the motion is out of order.
I will challenge the chair.
Very good. Clerk, could you please call the roll call on this? And you might want to explain what the vote is for. So yes.
of the chair be sustained? Ms. Bradford?
No.
Monsieur Drouin?
No.
Mr. Erskine-Smith?
No.
Ms. Khalid? No. Ms. Yip?
No.
Mr. McCauley?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés?
Oui.
Mr. Blaney? Ms. Blaney, sorry. My apologies.
Oui, yes.
I don't have a sub for Mr. Nader. Four yeas, 5 nays.
Very good. Now, has the motion been sent in to the clerk?
Yes, sir.
It has been. If you would, I'll just suspend for 2 minutes. If I could just have the witness just hold on for a little bit, and the clerk will distribute. I'll come right back in 2 or 3 minutes. Bringing the meeting back into order, I'm going to turn to Ms. Yip to take the floor on your motion, please. Then I have Mr. Perkins and Mr. Drouin. Ms. Yip, you have the floor.
So,
Si
Should
vous
we
pouvez
wait till
nous donner
everybody's
quelques minutes, on va voir comment ça va ici
Could you please give us a few minutes?
around the room if you like in the meantime.
okay.
Ms. Yip.
So the motion is in response to the accusations that our witness, Ms. Mito, is unwilling to cooperate with the RCMP. She has already stated that she is a cooperative, and I don't see why she has to go through the RCMP. And I think Mr. Cooper should be apologizing for his tone and tenor of attacking the witness. And we're waiting for you to apologize.
Thank you. I have a speaking list that's ready to go. Thank you, Ms. Yip. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to adjourn this motion, the debate on this motion.
I have a motion to adjourn debate on the motion. Could you call the question, clerk?
Shall the motion of Mr. Perkins be adopted? Ms. Bradford. It's to adjourn debate.
It's to adjourn the debate on this motion.
No.
Monsieur Drouin.
No.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
No.
Ms. Khalid. No. Ms. Yip. No. Mr. Cooper.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley.
Yes.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Oui.
Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Five yeas, 5 nays.
Très bien. Je vais demander à Madame Méthode.
I'm going to ask Ms. Méthode to please take her seat. And now I would like to come back to Ms. Yip.
4.5 minutes, please. The floor is yours again,
Okay.
Ms. Yip.
Let me just see. Madame Méthode, with all that's happened, I don't think that you were given really the opportunity to defend yourself. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I believe that in my opening statement, I said everything that was important, and you will get that statement, and you also will get the detailed table. And that way, Mr. Perkins will get all of the detailed answers on the list. You also have the document on the infrastructure bank that explains my conduct for each of the meetings. I know that Mr. Perkins was interested in that, and it's a pleasure to share that confidential information with you. In addition, I reiterate my desire and my interest to have an in-depth dialogue, including with my detractors, so that we can discuss the facts and do this on behalf of Canadian entrepreneurs in new technologies. As MPs, you represent people, entrepreneurs, people are trying to build their businesses, and it will always be in my best interests to continue to assist them and advancing them, especially as they are technological entrepreneurs. But I don't think that I'm here to defend myself. I've only the truth to tell, which is very simple.
What have been the impacts of the continued conservative politicization of SDTC on the clean tech industry?
C'est difficile pour moi de vous parler.
It's difficult for me to tell you about the entire industry because I don't have an ongoing discussion with the entire industry on a daily basis. What I can tell you is there is a concern because SDTC is a program that's existed for numerous years and has helped advance things. So there is concern. I could tell you about the impact that these debates have had on me. It's really not easy to be attacked with lies. It is very difficult when you've built your reputation over 25, 30, 50 years, and you've done it with your heart, and your family has sacrificed to be demolished by lies in the public arena. And seeing as I'm a person who truly believes that this dialogue needs to move forward, I extend my hand to Mr. Perkins. I often travel to Halifax. We have businesses in your very lovely riding, and we're there to help, and I am here to help you, your entrepreneurs, to perform. And I will never hold you anything against you, Mr. Perkins, but you have kept me up many nights, and you have made me feel diminished. My spouse has never seen me in this state, but I remain here to help because I truly believe in what I do. I have dedicated my life to this cause, and it is not for political interests or tweets on X that I am going, to drop this. As we say in my family, in my community in Baie-Comeau, this kind of thing only makes you stronger.
I am sorry that you have already stated several times that you feel that your reputation has been tarnished. And previously you had started to say something about yourself being a woman, and then you were cut off. Did you?
Oui. Alors souvent, j'ai eu l'impression que j'étais attaquée.
Yes, I've often been under the impression that I was being attacked because I was a woman, a Quebecer, an environmentalist, because I was known. I don't know. But if ever one day Mr. Perkins wants to go out for coffee, it will be my pleasure to talk with him and to understand what his profound reasons are for attacking a Canadian woman devoted to building businesses.
Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
The Auditor General raised almost $400 million of funds that were either conflicted or spent outside the terms of the agreement. That's my concern, on behalf of taxpayers. My concern, I'm sorry if it offends you, that by your own admission, your company's received $10.4 million while you're on the board. But that's not my concern that you feel offended by it. My concern is that you clearly were in a conflict of interest. Now, I want to go in a different vein. On your time on the board, you, according to the lobbyist register, you lobbied government 51 times. Now, I don't know if you were in the meetings. It's under your name. Between 2016 and 2021 for various aspects of STTC's needs. 47 times on those registrations prior to his election, Stephen Guilbeault is listed. Were you both doing the lobbying together, or was Mr. Guilbeault doing it on his own?
Premièrement,
first, those meetings followed all of the lobbying rules. And if you've read about them, it's because they were declared. And Stephen Guilbeault and I traveled across the country subsequent to a study done showing underfunding. Believe it or not, we met with politicians in Alberta. This was before Stephen Guilbeault was in politics. We traveled to Halifax, Ontario, Quebec, federal. Could you please leave?
I was very... Well, so it's true. He was in lobbying 47 times. 11 were with the Prime Minister's office, including Mr. Butts, 2 with Minister Baines, actually 6 times with future Minister Champagne. So it appears that you had a lot of high-level access in Ottawa to those folks. You mentioned Mr. Guilbeault's interest as some sort of compensation. He lists it still, that he has it on his public disclosure of conflict of interest. So since the time that you were on the board until recently, the value of your company has gone up 6 times. So is it fair to say that Mr. Guilbeault's investments, whatever those are, has gone up 6 times?
Okay.
Let's settle this very simply. Mr. Guilbeault has passive interest, and when he left, his interest ended and the value is not increased. You are confusing asset management and values. Second point, Mr. Perkins, you were at the CIB when you granted employees at CIB, when they managed funds, the right to passive interests. And Mr. Guilbeault got the exact same treatment as any advisor for any capital risk fund.
Of interest in 2023, which list an interest in Cycle Capital, is incorrect, that he made a false disclosure of conflict of interest?
Monsieur
Mr. Guilbeault has to make those declarations, given that he had those interests. It's a kind of a performance bonus, so he has to declare that. It's his responsibility.
He owns, not what he used to own in some time before he was elected. It's what he currently owns, and he's still listed.
Il y a toujours,
So
il y a
I'll move
toujours,
on.
pour répondre à votre question, monsieur.
To answer your question, Mr. Perkins, he's always, had what he says, because we are the ones to provide him with the information each year, and it's reviewed by our...
Declare it. I'll move on. How many investments and what's the value that Brookfield has made in your funds?
Où?
Brookfield Management.
Ils étaient des investisseurs de notre...
They were investors in our first fund, which underperformed compared to the current.
On all your press releases as an industrial partner. What's an industrial partner?
Les partenaires industriels.
Industrial partners, of which we have several, L'Oréal, Hydro-Quebec, Alouette, Alcan, Brookfield, are private corporate businesses or public on the markets that decide to invest in investment funds. And they are
A financing partner on your funds. In 2017...
A very quick question.
Non, attendez, attendez.
Can I? May I?
As time
Monsieur Perkins a le temps pour une dernière question.
from you, then I'm going to go to Ms. Bradford. Mr. Perkins, I'm a short question, no preamble, please.
In 2017, you made an investment with a Chinese state-owned enterprise. They're an investor with you, and you have an office in China. Are you following the Chinese National Security Act that requires those who operate in China to spy and steal technology?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. As much as I have no idea what the heck that has to do with SDTC. If the member wants to put a motion forward to go after those, I'm sure we could, but I don't see how this relates to our study.
Madame Metelati, réponse ou...
I'm not a Chinese spy.
You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Order. Ms. Bradford, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, Madam Lowe, thank you so much for your patience. And I'm so sorry the stress this has caused you and your family. I know you were into committee about a year ago, and here you are back again. And I hope people watching at home don't think that if they step forward to serve on a board of directors, that this could be their fate sometime down the line, because I hate to think that that might be the case and preclude people from serving in this important work. So I just wanted to give you a chance to finish your answer to Mr. Perkins' questions that he cut you off on. So if you want to complete that answer that you would have said.
Bon, alors
Well, I'd like to repeat. We followed all the rules. I recused myself. I declared all of my real and potential conflicts of interest. It is in writing everywhere. I've added to what the Auditor General did. Mr. Perkins, I will reiterate that, yes, we did have activities in China, and we managed Chinese money in China. We have withdrawn since. I have to say that the situation in China has greatly evolved in the last 10 years. And as an experienced business person, and just like any other one, we've done business with many different players in the world, but our activities there have started. And I would like to reiterate, I am not a Chinese spy. I'm a woman, feminist, environmentalist, francophone, and I also believe in abortion.
That clarification. It's now in the Hansard record. There you go. So now, as part of the investigation, has the RCMP reached out to you? No. Okay. We hear falsely that this fund being coined as a green slush fund, that is money set aside in a pot to sit there and not be used, which we know is false, as over $3 billion in revenue has been generated from companies that have received SDTC funding. Can you speak to some of these funding decisions, how the board decided to provide funding over the long term, and the recusal process that was needed each time a project came in front of the board for a funding proposal?
OK, donc le processus était très simple.
The process was very simple. There were eligibility criteria, and the SDTC team did an analysis. And I repeat, these people were competent. They did a detailed analysis. And once once SDTC determined the company was eligible, then it came to the PRC committee, the Project Review Committee. And we did not finance businesses. Each project had criteria, and we would assess whether the criteria had been met, and then we assess the quality of what was presented. Often, when there was debate and files were admissible, but sometimes the committee found that the file wasn't strong enough, so members would suggest the proposal be enhanced so that we'd have a winning project. The purpose of SDTC is to build winning companies. It's not to finance companies. It's to give companies an opportunity to be winners in a competitive world environment in technologies. It's also to solidify intellectual property, to enable businesses to compete on a worldwide market. So these would be the conversations we'd have. Once projects were admitted, a contract was negotiated, but that was not the members of the board. That would be the SDTC team, and they were competent. They negotiated the contracts with milestones, so specific goals for each one of the companies. There are companies that lost their funding because they could not attain the goals, or they got a portion of their funding only. There was very rigorous follow-up. And I think that is what needs to be understood. The board of directors is just one element in a big process. So for businesses, it could take a year and a half before having access to an SDTC grant, because the process was very demanding. This is what I observed over the 4 years I was there. I left, it was more than 3 years ago, but during the period I was there, those were my observations.
Time for one brief question, but you do risk cutting off your colleague if you go long. But you have the floor if you like.
Can you just briefly say some of the unique challenges clean tech startups in Quebec face compared to other regions in Canada, and how was SDTC able to address these?
Je dirais pas.
I wouldn't say that Quebec businesses are different from the rest of Canada. My observation is that challenges are similar for everyone. These companies don't have profits. They're developing. So all of these clean tech companies face significant funding challenges. So I wouldn't say there are any specificities in Quebec. And I say as to conquering, world markets with technologies, the challenges are as big for the Halifax area or Toronto area. It's all facing the same worldwide challenges. We have 4 members left. Ms. Sinclair de Gagné.
Madame Méthode, d'abord.
First, I am very sorry for everything you've experienced in the last months. Indeed, I can personally testify that it's been unpleasant. It's happened to me too. Now, in the case of SDTC, I would like to repeat and I would like to rectify in regard to recent questions. Indeed, you left in 2021. But what I meant to say is there was already some conduct, behaviors, and I'd just like to mention one name, Mr. Cavalier. I think you hired him, and then he was dropped very quickly without many apparent reasons, and I'll leave it there. But I would like us to concentrate on the fact that in listening to you today, and I said so in a recent intervention, what's happened at SDTC is quite serious, to the point where Minister Champagne chose to abolish this. Now, in listening to you, SDDC and what went on there was very rigorous, and we heard from the Auditor General, and before that, Raymond Chabot, and leads us to believe it's the contrary. Quite frankly, I think there's quite a difference between your testimony today and the reports from the Auditor General of Canada and Raymond Chabot. So this is a quick question. Do you think Mr. Champagne made a mistake by abolishing SDTC? Well, Minister, you're an expert. I'm not an expert in abolishing or not abolishing. No, but you're an expert in SDTC. No, I'm not. I'm an expert in clean tech. So I thought, in your words, you had been an expert in clean tech. So the biggest funding institution in Canada, SDTC, was abolished. Was it a good decision? I think the businesses merit to be supported just like the similar companies in the U.S. should. I think we need to find a way to continue that support. Political decisions connected with that belong to the politicians. I'm not a politician. So the conclusions of the Auditor General, which gave Mr. Champagne sufficient reason to abolish SDTC, along with the reports he'd seen earlier, are those also erroneous or partial? Is that your belief? I cannot tell you if it's erroneous or partial. All I can talk about is when I was there. I've not been there for 3 years. There's some good things. There's always room for improvement. I don't know of any organization where there's not room for improvement.
Yes, please.
Thank you for remembering me this time. I deeply appreciate it. I also want to just put it on the record that I do apologize for some of the behavior we've seen in this committee today, and also just the reality of being a citizen that becomes part of the public gaze. But I guess, we are trying to figure out what happened here and get some clarity. And one of the things that I always fall back on these very contentious political issues is process, and what do we need to fix in the long term to make sure that we have systems that Canadians can understand and respond to in a positive way. It does concern me hearing largely the Conservatives just ripping apart public servants and process. I think it's very important that we talk about the process problems and the accountability we need to have to Canadians without ripping apart the people who work for the government. So I'm just wondering, in the time that you were on the board, did you review the processes that you had and the issues that might arise from that? And if you could just clearly denote for the committee, what mechanisms did you have on your term that would allow you to flag any serious concerns that you had? And how easy was it to use the mechanisms? If we could get a little clarity on that, I think that would help us understand what we need to see more effective change in the future.
Thank you for your question, and thank you also for your support, Mrs. Desgagnés and Ms. Blaney. It's much appreciated. Each year, or in general each year, there's an annual review. We draw up a business plan, a strategic plan. I think that's classic in all boards, and that is an opportunity for discussion. Was there a detailed review of processes? We have to understand that oftentimes these analyses are done in subcommittees. I only sat on one committee, which was the program review, and due to my, technical knowledge, the engineer, someone who is knowledgeable about finance. There's a governance committee that dealt with governance, but I never sat on that committee. So I think it's a question for the governance committee. But I can say that the annual review process and the business plan, these are processes where members can make known their viewpoints, and for members were able to contribute to updates, and there are changes to programs made, and the Auditor General mentions this. So my answer would be in part, yes, but not in as much detail. But yes, there was that, but not perfect, because no organization is perfect. And if you'll allow me, an observation or advice, one thing I much appreciated at the CIB is putting in place a registry of real conflicts, potential conflicts, and a detailed record for each member. Now, we did not have that in SDTC, and it would have helped us. And I think that I have to cut you off. There will be members asking you questions about that.
Mr. McCauley and then Mr. Erskine-Smith. Mr. McCauley, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I want to follow up on a question from Mr. Cooper that I don't think we got answered, was if you had read the SDTC Act that lays out rules and guidance regarding conflict.
Je comprends pas la question.
I do not understand the question, Mr. Chairman.
I've paused the clock for you to ask your question.
Je m'excuse, monsieur. Sincèrement, je comprends pas.
Quite sincerely, I do not understand the question.
I asked you very specifically if you had read the SDTC Foundation Act that stated very clearly about prohibiting board members from receiving any financial gain or other gains.
Moi, ce qu'on m'a expliqué.
What was explained to me was that I had to recuse myself and declare my conflicts.
Asking, did you read that?
Écoute, ça fait très longtemps.
It's been a long time. Generally, I do read those things. And I have enough experience to read the documents that I need to read as a board member. And if I had not been, acceptable as a member of the board, I would expect that ultimately the minister would have said that.
General. And you agree with it?
Il y a des points qui sont valides.
There are points that are valid. There are points that merit examination. And as to the list of conflict of interest.
If you say there are points that are valid, do you believe there's invalid points?
Non. Ce que j'ai dit, c'est qu'il y a des...
No. I said there are points that are valid. And what I said is when I look at the list of conflicts of interest attributed to me, at the time of the votes, that analysis was not done. And that is why I prepared a table which you will see later, which settles that issue. I think the Auditor General...
Co-founder of Ecofiscal, I think?
Ecofuel.
Ecofuel, Quebec. And another organization that I see received once, and you were co-founder with Minister Guilbeault, I understand.
C'est faux.
No, that's wrong. I'm co-founder, but not with Mr. Guilbeault.
OK. Laissez-moi vous aider.
Let me help you here. There's Ecotech Quebec, which is a not-for-profit in Quebec, and I'm co-founder with two entrepreneurs. Mr. Guilbeault is not there.
Once the Liberals came to power, the amount of money you received for that program multiplied by 350% or increased by 350%. One of the notes I'm reading from the grants and contributions is the duty of the recipient to relocate or reallocate or redistribute the grant or contributions to third parties. Could you provide for this committee who you redistributed or reallocated the $3 million? I don't need it right now, but could you provide in writing that?
Je ne comprends pas le 3 millions.
I don't understand the 3 million. Who was the 3 million given to?
But straight from the Treasury Board.
OK. Alors, Ecotech,
3.146, actually.
Ecotech
So Ecotech is a not-for-profit that I co-funded with other entrepreneurs. Ecotech has a board of members.
Distribute or reallocate the monies that you received to third parties.
Monsieur, Ecotech ne distribue.
Ecotech does not distribute money. And it has nothing to do with SDTC.
Directly from the Grants and Contribution website, published by Treasury Board, is a duty of the recipient, yourself, to reallocate or redistribute the grant or contribution to third parties. So would you provide?
No.
So you're saying
No.
that this is right from their website.
Écoutez,
I was a founding member, volunteer, founding member of Ecotech Quebec. It's volunteer work.
Understand some of our concern. We have the Auditor General pointing out lots of conflict. You have Treasury Board stating money that went to your foundation, which is supposed to be passed on to other groups that you're now saying. But no,
ce n'est pas ma fondation. C'est la fondation.
It's not my foundation.
When we are Canadians are lining up at food banks at record amounts, difficulty getting
J'ai
by
énormément
day
de
to
respect
day.
pour tous les
We have
Canadiens
the
et tous les
Auditor
Canadiennes.
General reporting
Écoutez, je pense
$400
qu'on va
million.
devoir quitter, Monsieur le Président.
I think we're going to have to leave.
They're at the table, but you're not allowed, as part of your agreement, to be here to be waiving the offer of questions. Thank you very much. Ma'am, do you understand the concerns expressed by taxpayers and myself?
Avec ça, Monsieur, je suis la.
I'm the co-founder of a not-for-profit that belongs to its members.
About this whole
Ah,
scandal?
non, je peux dire que j'ai énormément de respect.
I can say that I have lots of respect. My parents paid taxes their entire lives and raised their children properly. You have before you somebody who has a great deal of respect for all Canadians and who feels privileged to live in Canada in a democracy.
You have the floor for 5 minutes. Mr. Erskine-Smith appears to be Is there a member who would like to fill in for Mr. Erskine-Smith? No, he's not small. He's Well, it is all right. You've got just under 5 minutes, Ms. Kalin.
I'll fill in until Mr. Erskine-Smith. I am sure that he's attending question period right now as we speak. I know that Monsieur Drouin had a statement in question period, so I'm sure that Nate is really paying attention to what Mr. Erskine-Smith, well, to what Mr. Francis Drouin has to say. So I will, as I am the last questioner, I will ask our esteemed witness here today if she has. She's obviously been in this committee for a very, very long time, and thank you for your time today. Is there anything that you would like to say to Canadians with respect to what we have discussed today, with respect to your role? I give you the floor to help us understand why you think that you are here today and what challenges you have had to face, and what is your message for Canadians with respect to everything that you have heard today.
First, I have a general comment on the fact that climate change is a reality. It is going to deeply change our societies. Immigration will be different. Water levels will rise. Forest fires, and Canadian entrepreneurs have solutions that can change our ways of consuming and polluting And we have to believe in those Canadian entrepreneurs. We need to support them. And we have to have among them the best in the world. And I sincerely believe that if the discussion on SDTC, which is not easy, I mean, there are things that have been put into question. Parliamentarians have paid attention to this, and I think we need to look in towards the future. There's a worldwide race technologically to combat climate change, and forthcoming years will be difficult. We're already seeing this. We've seen this in the fires in Jasper, the flooding. Territories, being lost. There are already areas in Canada that are less habitable. Same in the States. It's not just about the poor countries, but the rich countries do need to bring about solutions. And one thing we can do is clean tech entrepreneurship, and we need to focus on that. That said, if we need to improve the programs, be more demanding, I'm on side. I'm even on side with Mr. Perkins on that, because collectively we have to raise the bar. And I'm always available to answer those questions. I say it, it will be a pleasure to go to Halifax and show him the extraordinary companies in the Halifax area that are working very hard. Mr. Perkins, do you have a comment? I can listen to you. No, this is your time. Then it would be my pleasure. And he should be proud of all of those companies in his riding. And I'm here for that. I've no other mission. I've raised all my kids. I won't tell you how many because I think you'd pass out, Mr. Perkins. But all of my kids were raised with the values: honesty, fighting climate change, respect for women, respect for differences, contribute. People who do nothing never make mistakes. It's people who do things that make mistakes. It comes with responsibility and accountable. And I'm here today to respond to that. And in spite of yourselves, you have an ally, Mr. Perkins.
Thank you very much for that, Madame. I just wanted to say, it's really interesting how the impact of what happens in Parliament impacts business. But I do share the concern of parliamentarians in public accounts specifically about how taxpayer dollars are used. And with the transition now going forward, what are your thoughts about that? And what are the implications that you think we should be looking for as parliamentarians with that respect?
Alors, je vais me permettre de vous donner.
Well, I'd like to share the results of an analysis we just conducted. Right now, we're looking at the oil sector, all of the sector also of advanced technologies. The cloud servers are more and more contributors to CO2, and with the industrial revolution we have before us, which is going to affect the Internet of Objects, microelectronics, the electrification of transport, we continue to produce CO2. We're going to have to be, more creative. We can't just point the finger at only some industries, because the transformation of our economy will give rise to more CO2, and be it a CO2 that's produced by microelectronics or the chemical industry, is still the same CO2 in the atmosphere. So we will have to raise our standards. We will need to understand that there are points that have never been touched that are now being touched. And I invite you all to openness and to a structured and rigorous contribution to be able to further develop technologies. It's all very well to have an electric car, but if it is based on coal or, oil and other, it's no longer electric. Thank you very much. If you have any other comments, Ms. Metou, you can send those in.
And I will adjourn this meeting so we can all get off the question period. Merci beaucoup encore for your help.
you.